Hello class, today we are looking at reading graphs and figuring out unknown coordinates. In question 1, we're just starting nice and easy by making a table of values to represent the points on each graph, and then using that graph to answer our questions. Whenever we're given a picture, like a graph or an actual picture pattern, to make your table of values, you don't need to do any sort of calculation. You just need to, look and count on your graph or in your picture. So in our table of values, we just need x and y. There's no need for a calculation section or an ordered pair section. We already have our points on our graph. Remember, when you're counting on a graph, you can start at 0. You want to count how far left or right to go, and that will tell you your x number. And then you'll count how far up or down, and that'll give you your y number. So in this case, to get to the first point on the graph, I don't need to go either left or right from the origin point, but I do need to go 1, 2, 3, 4 up to get there. So since I don't have to go left or right, my x value will be 0, 0 distance left or right. And since I went 4 up, I'm going to have a y value of positive 4 for that first point. Looking at my next point, starting at the origin, I need to go 1 to the right, or plus 1 for my x, and then 3 up, or plus 3 for my y. And lastly, I have my last point over here, for which I need to go 4 to the right of my origin, and then I don't need to go up or down at all, so 0 up or down for my y. Now, when we make a table of values and we use it to figure out some unknown coordinates from a graph, we want to go ahead and connect the dots of our graph. Those connected dots are going to represent the pattern that we are dealing with. So draw a nice straight line connecting your dots there using your ruler or your straight edge. And that line represents the rule or the pattern that is making this graph. So we want to know what is y when x is 2. So you want to start when x is 2, so 2 on the x-axis, and you want to trace vertically directly to your line, and you'll intersect that line right here. You can then trace that across to see what the y value is at that point, and our y value is 2 at that point right there. So we know that when x is 2, y is also 2 in this relation. And we know that because we start with x is 2, and then we trace up to our pattern, and then across to see what y is. Similarly, in question B, we want to start by making our table of values, or our input-output table. Those words mean the same. For our first point, I need to go 1 to the right, or plus 1 for my x, and then 5 up, so 5 for my y. For my next point, I am going to need to take a look at this point here. I could count again, but I want to remind you that you can also trace from that point down to your axes. So this point is at 3 on the x, and it is at 2 on the y. So that also gives you a valid way of identifying your points. And in fact, those are the only points we have on this graph. To figure out our pattern, we're going to draw a straight line through those points, and again, trying to hit the centers of those points wherever possible. Something like that is our pattern. And of course, we can extend that pattern beyond the points that we have. These are just 2 random points, but the pattern goes on forever in either direction. To answer this question, we want to figure out what is x when y is minus 1. So we want to start at the point where y is minus 1, which is over here. We're going to trace directly horizontal until we meet our line, and then we'll trace up to see what the x value is at that location. And in this case, x will be 5 at that location. Okay, last one here, question C. Again, we're going to make our table of values. Remember, you could also make your table of values vertically. There's no difference between a vertical and horizontal table of values. So for my first point, I have an x value of minus 2 on the x, and a y value that also happens to be minus 2. For my next point, I do not have to go left or right at all, so I have an x value of 0. but I do have to go 2 up from the origin, so that'll be positive 2 for the y value. And for my last point, I need to go 1 right and 4 up. Remember, with these positive numbers, you can either have the plus signs with them, or you don't need them. Either way is fine. You do, of course, need your minus signs with those negative numbers. We're asked what is x when y is 6, so we want to be able to start where y is 6. Before we do that, however, we're going to want to go ahead and draw a straight line through our points to represent our pattern. And so here is our straight line here. Something a little bit like that. And so we can find the place where y is 6, which is right here. We're going to trace that out to our line, and then trace that down to see what x is, and obviously then x is 2. In the situation where we are given a relation, to complete our table of values, we need to do a calculation. So we're going to set up an x column, a calculation column, a y column, and if you want, an ordered pair column. And we're told to use the x's from 0 to 2, so that's 0, 1, and 2. Our calculation is told to us by our equation. We need to take the x value and subtract 1. So we're going to do 0, subtract 1, gives us a result of minus 1. The ordered pair, x is 0, y is minus 1, with our brackets and our comma. And same thing for our other x points. X is 1 in the second row, x is 2 in the third row. We need to subtract 1 from each of those from the formula. 1 subtract 1 is 0, and 2 subtract 1 is 1. And that gives us our ordered pairs of 1 and 2 for the x values, and 0 and 1 for the y values. We can then go ahead and plot these points on the graph. So I use some different colors here just to show the different points. First point here at 0, comma, minus 1 means it goes 0 left or right and 1 down. My next point, let's do in purple, is at 1, comma, 0. So that means 1 to the right and 0 up or down. And my last point here is 2, comma, 1. I'll use a different green for that. Let's use this light blue. 2, comma, 1 is going to be 2 to the right and 1 up. And of course, those points do form a nice straight line for us. So in terms of using our graph to be able to find those missing coordinates, we again want to draw a line to represent our pattern through our points. And our line's pretty simple here, something a little bit like that going on. And of course, we can extend that, continuing that same line, as long as we need to. So if we have an x value of 5, we're going to go ahead and start at that x is 5, which is right here. We're going to trace that up to our line and trace it over to see what y is, and y is 4 in that case. On the other hand, when we look and we have a y value of minus 2, we want to start there and head down to our line, and then across, a y value of minus 3, I believe. Nope, minus 2 is fine. Sorry about that. Y value of minus 2 is right here. Trace that across to our line and then up. We can see that our x value is minus 1. That's better. Okay. In terms of using our equation to find our missing coordinates, our equation is y equals, x minus 1. And in this case, we're just going to plug in that our x is 10. So y equals 10, subtract 1. So y equals 9 is our missing coordinate there. In this other question, though, we are given a y value of 41. And so in our equation, y equals x minus 1, our 41 has to go in that y spot. And now we need to solve for x. The only thing being done to x right now is it's being subtracted by 1. The opposite of subtracting 1 is adding 1. And we can say that 42 is the x value at that time. You might notice that in this particular relation, the y value is always 1 less than the x value, which makes sense from our equation. The only other thing we're missing on our graph here is a title. For a relation like this, we just title it using our relation equation itself, and we just make sure that we label our x and our y axes. Okay, similar type of thing in question 3. I'm not going to go over that one right now. For question 4, again, I want to emphasize that when we're given a picture, to create your table of values, you just want to count. Another word for this, of course, is input-output tables. And so we can think about our input being our number of increases after the start, and our output, you could do a variety of things, but I'm going to do the number of shaded squares in this situation. And then we just want to represent the situation that we have. For our starting picture, which is input 0, 0 times of doing the action, we have 8. If you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares shaded in. After 1 increase, so input 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 squares. And after 2 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 for that value there. In terms of writing a rule, you want to look at what you start with. Okay, so whatever we have when the input is 0 is our starting value. So we'll say start with 8 squares. And what do we do after that? Each time we're adding 8 additional squares in this, 2 on each corner. 4 corners obviously makes 8 each time. So we're going to say and add 8 squares each time. Okay. In terms of our graph, we need to get up to about 24 on our y-axis, or our output, and only 0, 1, and 2 on our input. I'm giving you a hint to use a y-axis 0 to 50, and we can do that by counting by 2's. So I'll start with my y-axis here. I don't really have any negative values, so that should be fine. My x-axis here. And if I put 50 up at the top per the hint, then I'm going to count by 2's down. 48, 46, 44, 42, 40, 38, 36, 34, 32, 30, 28, 26, 24, 22, 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, look at that, 0. Okay, in terms of my x-axis, I'm just going to go ahead and do counting by 1's. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over. Now again, this is a situation, so I want to actually label what these are. The x-axis represents the the input, which is the number of increases. And the y-axis is the number of squares. I'll just write that horizontally. It's vertically, I guess. Okay, and this is squares in a pattern as our title. So plotting those points on a graph, we start at input 0 with a point at y is 8. When input is 1, y is 16. And when input is 2, y is 24. So there's 3 points on our graph. Now when we use our graph to answer our questions, again we're going to want to draw a line on our graph using our ruler. It's a nice straight line through our points. Whoops, that's not very straight. Good gravy. Let's try that again. Something a little bit like that. Nice straight line. And we want to know how many squares are there after 4 increases. So we can trace that up. We're going to cross over right there. Trace it over. We have 40 squares on the y-axis. And let's do a different color here. Let's do this lovely green. Which drawing has 48 squares? So we can go ahead and trace that across for our 48 squares. And we'd see that we're getting there on our line. So that is going to be drawing number 5. Okay, so that's going to be a nice simple answer from our graph. Instead of trying to draw it out, you could of course continue the pattern in table of values as well, and that would be pretty easy. So I hope this has helped you with graphing and reading graphs to figure out unknown coordinates.